Let's get ready to rumble!
Yeah, you ready to get recorded now, yeah, for the interview?
Yes, man. Come on, man. Stop playing, man. I'm ready. I'm ready to fight.
Anything you want to tell the public out there?
I am the greatest!
Right, left, your checklist, and then you say, God damn it.
You got knocked the fuck out, man. Get knocked goddamn.
Word is born, I'ma smoke 'em, yo, don't make no move. I treat it like boxing, stick and move, nigga.
Left, right, left, right, left, right. And he was out for the night.
You know we need that trademark bark before you depart from our company, man. You know what I mean? Can we get the barking and we're gonna need that bark, you know what I mean?
Oh, man. Jesus Christ, fellas. Dog is coming.
I don't care if he knocked me down, I was ready to go with him. Whatever you wanted to do, I was going to match him. All the way, mate, all the way. Now you might start believing in the Dark Destroyer.
Shout out boxing when I heard you on the radio. I just don't know.
Boxing beats and rhymes, boxing beats and rhymes.
I got knowledge, and others brothers lacking.
I don't know if you want to answer. Possible Manny Pacquiao fight with Floyd Mayweather. How you feel about that?
Well, basically, it's a fight that still has the potential to happen.
I'm Sonny Liston, I'm Jack Dempsey. There's no one like me. I'm from their claw. There's no one that can match me.
Boxing beats and rhymes, boxing beats and rhymes, boxing beats and rhymes, boxing beats and rhymes.
Valenti was the promoter for the 1973 AAU tournament, where Hagler made his big splash. But Valenti's influence stopped in New England. Hagler now needed a promoter with some juice. The United States may have been the epicenter of boxing, but not of the middleweight division. The great Argentinian champion, Carlos Monzon, had ruled the 160-pounders for most of the decade, and the middleweight title was securely controlled by top ranks Bob Arum and Arum's Italian partner, Rodolfo Sabatini. Between 1970 and 1979, there had been 25 middleweight title fights. 17 of them had taken place in Europe, 7 in South America. During that span, only 2 American-born fighters had challenged for the championship, and the only middleweight title fight to take place in the US was when Monzon defended against Tony Licata at Madison Square Garden in '75. The New York Times' Michael Katz had become the Fourth Estate's most prominent booster of Hagler's cause. He suggested that the Petronellis should align themselves with Bob Arum, but they were paranoid about promoters, especially after Hagler's absence from Don King's tournament. I had received letters from Ted Kennedy and from Tip O'Neill threatening they would hold congressional hearings if I didn't get Marvin a title shot, recalled Arum. Most of my middleweight fights had been in Europe, so I didn't know much about Hagler, other than he was a terrific fighter and that King had fucked him over by keeping him out of that tournament, unless he signed with him. But I knew I didn't want Congress on my back. Arum did not realize that the saber rattling on the park. Arum did not realize that the hard campaign for Hagler on the part of the politicians had been the result of some prodding by former Brockton mayor George Wainwright, whose eccentric lawyer son Steve now represented Hagler and the Petronellis. Arum had already done closed-circuit business with Rip Valenti. He brought the Petronellis to Arum's office in New York. The long-term contract arranged that day called for Hagler to fight an Argentinian middleweight named Norberto Cabrera, who owned an earlier win over champion Hugo Corro on the undercard of Antuofermo's challenge to Corro in Monaco that summer, with the understanding that if he performed up to expectations, his next fight would be against the winner. The Hagler party was headquartered in San Remo on the Italian Riviera. This provided Hagler the first glimpse of the country in which he would later box in and eventually live. Antuofermo trained in the south of Italy, near his old home in Bari. The pre-fight press conference also took place in San Remo and was conducted in French, Italian and Spanish. Periodically, Hagler heard his name mentioned, but had no idea what the speaker was saying. He turned to Michael Katz and said, "I feel like a piece of meat." The Petronellis didn't bring any sparring partners, recalled Katz, because Arum had assured them that there would be plenty in Europe and that it would be cheaper. The sparring that Bob promised never materialized, and Marvin's only sparring was against Goody holding the mitts. So for the first few rounds against Cabrera, Marvin was effectively getting in the sparring that he had missed. The French crowd, which adores middleweights, was going ooh la la at Marvin's brilliance, remembers Katz. And by the time the referee Stanley Christodoulou stopped it, I swear the only thing holding Cabrera up was Hagler's uppercuts. On June the 30th, 1979, Hagler stopped Cabrera at the Chapiteau de Fonteville in Monte Carlo in the main event that night. Antuofermo won a split decision to take the middleweight title from Coro. Hagler Cabrera had been taped by ABC to use on the telecast in case the title fight ended prematurely. After Hagler's bout before Antuofermo's fight against Coro, Howard Cosell approached Katz at his ringside position and said, "You call that a great fighter? I was just on the phone to New York and told them not to put that piece of shit on the air. You must have a piece of that guy," Cosell muttered to Katz as he walked away. Only later did the reason for Cosell's outburst and for his reluctance to allow his call of the Hagler-Cabrera bout to see the light of day become clear. The network had done a live 4-tape call, which could not be redubbed. Cosell had berated Hagler's performance, which most observers viewed as a virtuoso performance, because Christodoulou had stopped the fight too early. Cosell was saying that Christodoulou was in bed with Arum. He should never work another fight. He should be run out of town. Mike Katz revealed all of this. Someone in the ABC truck interrupted to tell him through the earpiece how would he stop the fight because Cabrera's corner threw in the towel. Arum was true to his word. On the 30th of November 1979, in his 50th pro fight, Hagler took on Vito Antuofermo for the middleweight championship of the world at Caesar's Palace. But once again, he would be playing second fiddle to Sugar Ray Leonard, as Hagler's challenge for Antuofermo's middleweight title was relegated to the undercard of Leonard's challenge for Wilfred Benitez's WBC welterweight title. I had promoted the Benitez-Palomino fight, so I still had options on Benitez, said Arum. Even though Mike Trainer had already made his deal with Benitez, he still had to go through me. I think that may have been my first dealing with Mike Trainer. Trainer had already negotiated the terms with Benitez's manager, Jim Jacobs. He had also sidestepped the fight's eventual promoter in arranging the site before he came to Arum with the arrangement. Caesar's Palace was anxious to host Leonard's first title fight. Bob Halloran, a former Miami sportscaster, who was by then the president of Caesar's Palace, had telephoned Angelo Dundee to ask about Trainer, whom he had never met. "He's a small lawyer with one secretary," Dundee told Halloran. "And when he's not in the office, he's usually on the golf course." Halloran himself was a former scratch golfer who often played with the casino's high-rolling customers. He phoned Trainer and in the course of the conversation baited the hook by saying, "I hear you play a bit of golf. Are you any good?" "How many shots do you want?" asked Trainer. "Say no more," Halloran said. During the golf meeting, an agreement and a deal was struck. Caesar's Palace agreed to post a site fee for $500,000 to host the Benitez-Leonard fight. The agreement that Mike Trainer brought to Arum promised the challenger an unheard-of $1 million purse. The champion got $1.2 million. Hagler's purse, by contrast, was just $40,000. Although it was a career-high payday, it was precisely what Leonard had made for his professional debut. The same purse that Andy Price was paid after being served up to Sugar Ray 2 months earlier. Arum covered his investment by peddling for $1.9 million a package of free World Championship fights to ABC for a long night boxing marathon that would fill the network's entire Friday night primetime slots. Antuofermo Hagler with the second of the title bouts. The other would be Marvin Johnson's challenge to WBA light heavyweight champion Victor Galindez of Argentina. Arum said he had already sold the telecast to ABC, but at the time the sanctioning organizations were flexing their muscles. The WBC president Jose Sulaiman, in his infinite wisdom, decreed that we couldn't even have a championship fight from the other organization on the same card as a WBC fight, recalled Arum. Zig Rogic was the head of the Nevada State Athletic Commission. He went along with Sulaiman, so they had no alternative but to move the Victor Galindez-Marvin Johnson fight to New Orleans and use a split feed for the telecast. Arum said, so then to help the live gate at the Superdome, they put on a co-feature using another up-and-coming young welterweight, Thomas the Hitman Hearns. Although Hearns' decision victory over Mike Colbert wasn't part of the ABC bill, clips of it were shown on that evening's telecast after Johnson stopped Galindez in the 11th. For many television viewers, that night provided their first exposure to both Hagler and Hearns. Dismissive of Antuofermo's punching power, Hagler referred to the champion as Vito the Mosquito and handed out souvenir fly swatters at the pre-fight press conference. Antuofermo realized he could not hope to match Hagler's quickness or boxing ability, tried to force the pace and take the fight to the inside, but Hagler could brawl as well as box, and by the middle rounds of their 15-rounder, the champion's face was an absolute mess. Marvin was at his best over the first half of the fight, recalled Katz. He was landing combinations, hitting Antuofermo with everything he threw. Only Vito's chin kept him in the fight. After 12 rounds, Hagler appeared to have built up such a commanding lead that he could not possibly lose. Warned by the Petronellis to stay out of the corners and away from the ropes, he boxed conservatively down the stretch. I think it was more protecting a lead, said Mike Katz. Remember, at this point, Hagler had never gone 15 rounds and had only been the 12-round limit once. He seemed to be trying to husband his energy to conserve himself for the later rounds, and the more cautious he became, the more Antuofermo came on. By the 14th, Vito could sense his title slipping away and charged headlong at Hagler, resulting in a spirited exchange from which Antuofermo emerged, having sprung a few new leaks. And in the 15th, although Antuofermo fought furiously, Hagler caught him with at least one uppercut that nearly lifted him off the floor. As the combatants and their handlers milled around the ring after the final bell, referee Mills Lane asked Pat and Goody Petronelli to move to one side. I want to be facing the camera when I raise Marvin's hand, explained Lane. The announcement of the judges' cards, Dwayne Ford had it 1-5-1, 1-4-1 in Hagler's favour, reflecting the opinion of most at ringside. But his scorecard was offset by that of Dalby Shirley, who had scored the fight 1-4-4, 1-4-2 for Antuofermo. The third judge, Hal Miller, had it even, 143, 143, thus rendering the verdict a draw, and that allowed the Mosquito, Antuofermo, to retain the title. I promoted both Antuofermo and Hagler, but I thought Marvin won at least 8 rounds, and Vito no more than 4, said Arum. There were howls of protest from the crowd, and most sports writers were not satisfied with the decision. The long-suffering Hagler, whose paranoia didn't need much prodding, was convinced that he had been victimized by Vegas judges in a betting coup. It was a terrible decision, said Katz. If they had punch stats back then, they probably would have had Hagler outlanding Antuofermo 3-1. And remember, Vito couldn't punch. A bad decision, but at the same time, Katz said it wasn't Hagler's finest hour as a boxer. As Hagler walked back to his dressing room at Caesars that night, Hagler was intercepted by Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber. He told Marvin, "You won that fight. Don't give up." Through gritted teeth, Hagler replied, "I'll be back in the gym tomorrow." Bob Halloran, was himself a Massachusetts native. Later that night, he ran into the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Tip O'Neill was no more pleased by the decision than Hagler was. "You can tell the promoters," O'Neill warned Halloran, "that if Marvin doesn't get another title shot, there will be an investigation." Hagler, having been through one divorce, had recently taken up with Bertha Walker, a single mother of two from Brockton. He had promised that the two would be wed once he won the title, and she had flown to Las Vegas in anticipation of the outcome. Late that night, I was at a post-fight party at Caesars when I stepped out into the corridor and ran into Marvin and Bertha, remembered Michael Katz. They were walking hand in hand down the hall. "We're getting married anyway," Hagler told the Wolfman. "No matter what the judges said, as far as I'm concerned, I am the middleweight champion. I know I won that fight tonight." Hagler's indignation would be exacerbated when Leonard dispatched the previously unbeaten Benitez in a performance so convincing by midnight, any residual outrage over the Antuofermo verdict had been relegated to a footnote.